Hello, dear
This
listeners.
ends now.
Welcome to Golden Turnaround, your haven for soul-touching stories. No one could have imagined that, in a forgotten station of the Old West, a promise spoken aloud would become a sentence. "Fix my train, and I'll marry you," she said, laughing. But the laughter died when the steam exploded. The people retreated in panic. And he, the black mechanic, whom she insisted on calling Nobody, stepped forward as if he already knew the ending. Because this isn't just the story of a broken train, it's the story of a man crushed by humiliation, surrounded by unforgiving stares, and a wealthy woman, the owner of the railroad, who confused power with the right to hurt. She needed him to fail, in public. He needed to win, without losing his dignity. And when the impossible happens, the question that will haunt that station isn't, will he be able to fix it? It's another much worse one. If he succeeds, will he accept the marriage, or will he destroy her pride with a single sentence? Before you hear that answer, tell me, which city or country are you watching me from right now? Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below, because I read your comments, and this story becomes even more vibrant with your presence. Now close your eyes for a moment. Feel the dust clinging to your skin, the sun setting red behind the tracks, the smell of coal in the air, and the heavy silence of a crowd forming a circle, while the most powerful lady in the city raises her chin, and the train whistle, faltering, seems to call his name. "Fix my train and I'll marry you!" The voice echoed through the station like a thunderclap of wounded pride as the whistle died with a metallic sigh and the steam dissolved into the dry air of the Old West. But no one applauded, no one laughed, because everyone there knew that those words were not a promise of love. They were a sentence of public humiliation. This is the story of a black man who learned to fix machines because rich people broke poor people every day, and of a woman who owned the entire railroad line but could never buy the respect she pretended to have. And when the impossible happened at that dusty station, when he fixed the train that no one else could touch, what came next wasn't the wedding she promised with a smile. It was a lesson she never imagined she would need to learn. At that moment, as the locomotive gasped like a dying animal and the passengers began to stir with anxiety over the delay, she knew she was losing more than money. She was losing control. The owner of the most powerful railroad in that region couldn't appear weak. She couldn't admit that she depended on a mechanic she herself insisted on calling that black guy from the workshop. So, instead of asking for help, she screamed, loudly, as if the volume of her voice could hide the fear of being seen as vulnerable. He stood there near the platform, his hands stained with grease and his eyes fixed on the stopped train. He said nothing when she began to taunt him. He didn't retort when the men around him began to chuckle, waiting for him to bow down, because he already knew that game. I'd heard those words before, said in different ways, but always with the same intention: to make him feel small. Only this time he decided he wouldn't give in. Inside, his heart pounded. Not with anger. He had learned long ago that anger fixed nothing. It pounded with the weight of being watched, of knowing that his every move would be judged twice. Once by what he did, and again by the color of his skin. But on the outside he was pure calm, upright posture, firm gaze, hands ready. And then she said it. "Fix my train and I'll marry you." The entire station turned around. Some laughed nervously, others lowered their eyes, ashamed of what they had just witnessed, because everyone knew what that meant. She wasn't offering a chance. She was setting a public trap, betting that he would fail, so she could laugh louder and continue to own everything, including other people's dignity. But what she didn't know, as the sun began to set red behind the tracks and dust clung to everyone's skin, was that this man didn't repair machines for money. He repaired them for honor. And that, when the whistle sounded again and the wheels began to turn once more, it wouldn't just be the train she'd see depart. It would be the entire illusion that power buys everything. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened that night changed more than just a train line. It changed lives, and the lesson she learned might be the same one we all need to hear. That station wasn't just a stopping point. It was the main artery of a city that depended on those tracks to survive. Everything arrived by train: the medicines that saved feverish children on cold nights, the mail that brought news from distant relatives, the supplies that filled the empty shelves of the warehouse, the livestock that fed families, the orders that kept businesses alive. Without that train running, the whole city would suffocate, and everyone there knew it. But what weighed most heavily at that moment wasn't just the fear of scarcity. It was the blatant injustice of seeing who controlled everything. The owner of the railroad wasn't just rich, she was the law itself in that region. She decided who traveled and who stayed, who received goods at a fair price and who paid double, who deserved respect and who could be publicly humiliated without consequences. And nobody, absolutely nobody, dared to confront her, because confronting her meant losing jobs, losing credit, losing the chance to see their children grow up with some dignity. So, when she shouted that marriage promise as if it were a joke, collective resentment hung in the air, thick as the dust clinging to everyone's skin. People exchanged sideways glances, saying nothing but feeling everything. There were merchants there who owed her money, workers who depended on the railroad to support their families, women who had seen their husbands fired for far less than contesting an order. And now everyone was watching yet another display of power, her toying with a man's life as if it were entertainment. The sun beat down hard that afternoon, painting everything orange and red. Dust rose with the warm wind, getting into eyes, mouths, and lungs. The horses tied near the station shook their heads restlessly. Small children clung to their mothers' skirts, feeling the tension without fully understanding why. And the train, that iron giant that normally inspired confidence and movement, stood there, dead, like a heart that had stopped beating in the middle of the city's chest. There was a silent cruelty in it all. It wasn't just about a mechanic being challenged. It was about an entire system that allowed one person to have so much power over so many others. It was about how wealth bought not only comfort, but also the right to diminish those who had nothing. And the worst part, everyone knew that if that man failed, she would laugh. I was going to rub it in his face and in everyone else's face that he would never be good enough, no matter how talented he was. Because the game was rigged from the start. But something was changing at that station. Perhaps it was the way he didn't lower his head when she spoke. Perhaps it was the way he walked toward the train, without haste, without fear, without anger, just with the certainty of someone who knows what needs to be done. Or perhaps it was the silence that fell when he touched the engine for the first time, as if even the wind had stopped to observe. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about fixing a train anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about dignity, about transformation, about the possibility that, for the first time, someone could turn the tables without having to bow down. People on the platform began to approach slowly, forming an irregular circle around the locomotive. No one spoke. They only watched. Some with hidden hope, others with morbid curiosity, waiting for failure to confirm what they had always believed, that people like him had no place in that world. But there were also those who cheered silently, because they saw in that mechanic a version of themselves, people who worked hard, who knew how to do things right, but who never received the credit they deserved because they were born on the wrong side of the line that separated the powerful from the invisible. And as he opened the toolbox and chose the first part with the precision of someone who knows every screw in that machine, the owner of the line crossed her arms and raised her chin. She needed him to fail, not only to prove she was right, but to keep intact the world she had built, a world where she commanded and others obeyed. But deep down, very deep down, something in her trembled too, because if he succeeded, If that man she treated as nothing could fix the impossible, then what would that say about her choices, about the mask of superiority she wore to hide the emptiness she felt inside? The truth is that that station, at that moment, had become more than just a place of passage. It had become a stage where two forces clashed, the power that crushes and the dignity that resists. And the entire city, suffocated by the weight of that railway that dictated its destiny, was there, trapped between fear and hope, watching a man who, alone, held in his hands the possibility of changing everything. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, a name that carried weight in that region, a name that opened doors, closed deals, and made men tip their hats even before she passed by. But no one there knew the price she paid to keep that name intact. No one saw the nights she walked alone through the empty mansion, hearing only the echo of her own footsteps in the wide, cold corridors. No one realized that, behind that icy smile and impeccable posture, there was a woman who had learned too early that the world did not forgive weakness, especially in someone born a woman who decided to be in charge. Eleanor inherited the railroad from her father. Not because he believed in her, but because she had no son and needed someone to sign papers while the lawyers took care of the rest. But she surprised everyone. She took the reins. She fired those who doubted her. She expanded the operation. She made the business grow in a way her own father never could have, and in the process, she learned the bitterest lesson of all. Kindness was seen as weakness, and weakness was devoured alive in that world of men who controlled fortunes and destinies. So she built armor. She learned to speak louder, to laugh at the right time, even when she didn't find something funny, to transform every interaction into a power struggle, because yielding an inch meant losing a kilometer. And it worked. People began to respect her, or at least to fear contradicting her, which in the end amounted to the same thing. But what she never admitted, not even to herself, was that that armor had fused to her skin, that she no longer knew who she was beneath all that hardness, that the solitude at the top was so complete that sometimes she caught herself talking to herself just to hear a human voice inside that overly large house. And now, standing there at the station, with all those eyes fixed on her, Eleanor felt something she hated feeling: vulnerability. That stopped train was more than a mechanical problem. It was a crack in the image of absolute control she had spent years building. If the locomotive didn't leave, people would start to question, to doubt, to realize that in the end she depended on other people, and that was unacceptable. Because dependence was weakness, and weakness was the end of everything. That's why she attacked. Not because she hated that particular mechanic, but because she needed everyone to see that she was still in charge. That even with the train broken down, she decided who fixed it, how it was fixed, and what it cost. The marriage promise had been calculated. Cruel, yes, but efficient. Because publicly humiliating someone was the quickest way to reaffirm power. It was saying, without words, I can do whatever I want with you, and nobody will stop me. But as she watched the mechanic approach the locomotive with that irritating calm, something began to stir in her chest. It wasn't remorse. She'd learned to silence that voice long ago. It was fear. Fear that he might actually succeed. Because if he fixed the train, that her other mechanics couldn't, what would that say about the choices she'd made, about the men she kept in her job out of loyalty and not competence, about the fact that perhaps she was surrounded by people who only said yes because they were afraid to say no? Eleanor pressed her lips together and crossed her arms tighter. She needed him to fail, not out of malice, or at least that's what she told herself, but out of necessity. Because the hidden truth she would never admit was that the entire structure of her life depended on keeping things exactly as they were, and people who fixed the impossible had the power to change everything, to turn tables, to ask questions she didn't want to answer. "How long are you going to stand there staring, huh?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or do you just stand there pretending you know what you're talking about?" He didn't answer. He just picked up a tool and started working. And that firm silence, that refusal to play her game, irritated Eleanor more than any angry response would have. Because she knew anger. She knew how to deal with anger. But silent dignity, that was new and frightening. Around her, the crowd watched in tense silence. Eleanor felt the weight of those stares and realized, with a pang of panic she tried to disguise, that perhaps for the first time people weren't on her side. Not verbally, not openly, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. There was an undercurrent of hope that the man she was trying to diminish was greater than she had ever allowed them to see. And that's when Eleanor understood the true risk of that afternoon. It wasn't just about a train. It was about the possibility that everything she had built could crumble because of a single act of competence from someone she had always treated as invisible. His name was Samuel. That was all. No surname that came from a wealthy family, no titles that opened doors. Just Samuel, the mechanic. But those hands told a story that no surname could summarize. They were marked by old burns, scars that formed maps of hot metal, escaping steam, accidents that could have taken fingers if he hadn't known exactly what he was doing. The nails, always with grease residue underneath, were the silent testimony of years working with machines that others didn't even dare to touch. His clothes were simple. A cotton shirt patched at the elbows, thick fabric trousers stained with oil, worn but well cared for boots. Nothing there was new, but everything there was clean. Because Samuel had learned early on that dignity didn't reside in silk or gold. It resided in the way you presented yourself to the world, even when the world insisted on not seeing you. And he presented himself with his head held high, even though inside every insult weighed like lead. In the toolbox he carried, there was an old wrench. It wasn't the best tool there. He had newer, more efficient ones. But that wrench had belonged to the man who taught him everything, an old mechanic who saw potential where others saw only skin color. That man had been gone for years, but the tool remained, and every time Samuel held it, he remembered the words that changed his journey. Don't let them tell you who you are. Show them. He'd heard it all before. The jokes. The doubts disguised as questions. The feigned surprise when he fixed something they said was impossible. Wow, you really understand these things? As if competence were a privilege reserved for those born with fair skin and a full bank account. Each of those phrases was a small stab. It didn't kill him at once, but it cut slowly, accumulating weight over the years, creating a chronic pain that he had learned to carry without showing it. But Samuel had made a choice. A decision he made alone, on a cold night, after yet another day of being treated as if his presence were a favor granted to him. He decided he wouldn't break. He wouldn't bend. He wouldn't let the cruelty of others define the size of his soul. Because he knew something Eleanor would never learn. True strength doesn't come from how many people you can step on. It comes from how many times you get back up after being stepped on. So when she threw out that marriage proposal like poisoned bait, he felt it. He felt the humiliation burning in his chest. He felt the anger rising in his throat. He felt the urge to turn his back and let that train rot there, along with her pride. But then he took a deep breath. He looked at the locomotive, and he remembered why he was there. It wasn't for her. It was for the children who needed the medicine that came on that train, for the honest merchants who depended on those supplies, for the families waiting for news of distant relatives. That was bigger than his wounded ego, and it was certainly bigger than her need to feel powerful. Then he began to work, not in a hurry, not in anger, but with that calmness that only comes from someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Every movement was precise, every piece chosen with care. He wasn't there to put on a show. He was there to do what he always did, the right work in the right way, because his honor depended on it. And while Eleanor tried to diminish him with sharp words, something interesting was happening inside him. Instead of shrinking, he grew. not in arrogance or a desire for revenge, but in a deep understanding of who he truly was. He didn't need her marriage. He didn't need her approval. He didn't need anything that came from a place of contempt. What he needed and had was the self-respect that no humiliation could steal. There was a strange freedom in that, a silent revelation that when you stop seeking validation from those who will never give it to you, you become unbreakable. And Samuel, with his hands firmly gripping that ancient tool, was about to prove that dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. Comment below. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who had already decided to doubt you? The station had transformed into something none of them had planned, an open-air court. There was no judge, no official jury, but everyone there knew they were witnessing something bigger than a broken-down train. It was a moral trial, a silent battle between crushing power and enduring dignity. And every person on that dusty platform had chosen, consciously or not, which side they were on, even if no one dared to say it aloud. Eleanor sensed the perfect moment to tighten the noose. She took 2 steps toward Samuel, her heels clicking firmly on the wooden platform, making a sound that drew attention. All eyes turned to her. Good. She wanted them to see. She wanted everyone to remember that in that region, she was the one in charge. And that humiliating someone in public was just another demonstration of that power. "You know, Samuel," she said his name slowly, almost dragging it out as if savoring each syllable. "I've always admired people who have confidence, but confidence without results is worthless, isn't it?" She smiled, that smile that never reached her eyes. "Then I'll make it easy for you. Fix my train now in front of everyone, and I'll keep my promise. I'll marry you." Someone in the crowd let out a nervous laugh. Another coughed uncomfortably. An older woman shook her head but said nothing, because to speak meant exposing herself, and no one there could afford to expose themselves. Eleanor continued, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "Just imagine, you, the mechanic, becoming my husband, living in my mansion, dining at my table. What a turnaround, right? From grease on my hands to a ring on my finger." She paused, letting the silence weigh heavily. "But of course, that only happens if you really know what you're doing. And well, so far, I've only seen you looking at the train. I haven't seen any repairs done." The cruelty was there, exposed like an open wound. But there was something more in that voice, something only someone paying close attention would notice: desperation. Because Eleanor needed him to fail. She needed to prove to herself and to everyone there that this man was not worthy of the respect she had never given him. Because if he were, then all the decisions she had made up to that point would be wrong, and Eleanor Hartwell couldn't be wrong, not publicly, not when so many were watching. Samuel stopped. His hands still gripped the tool, but he paused. He took a deep breath. The air slowly entered his lungs, filling his chest, holding it there for a second before escaping. That second was eternal, because in that second, he felt everything: the anger, the humiliation, the urge to scream, the urge to drop everything and leave, leaving Eleanor and her train to rot together at that station. But then he remembered. He remembered the old mechanic who taught him. He remembered the words that changed everything. "Don't let them tell you who you are. Show them." And he understood that this was not the time to run away. It was the time to show them. Not to Eleanor, not to the crowd, but to himself. Because dignity isn't earned through arguments, it's earned through actions. He turned to her, slowly. Their eyes met, and for the first time that afternoon, Eleanor felt something that completely unsettled her. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't trying to please. He was simply there, whole, composed, looking at her as if he could see beyond the mask. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. His voice was low but clear, firm. "I'm going to fix the train, not because you promised marriage, not because you believe in me or don't believe in me. I'm going to fix it because it's the right thing to do, because there are people in this city who need this train running, people who have nothing to do with this situation." He paused. He swallowed hard. The anger was still there, but he controlled it with a strength that few there could possess. "I fixed the train, not your conscience." The phrase landed like a thunderbolt. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop, because everyone there understood what had just happened. Samuel hadn't simply refused to play her game. He had turned the tables, without shouting, without offending, simply speaking the truth in a way that no one could dispute. Eleanor felt her face burn, not with shame, she wasn't ready to feel that yet, but with anger, because she had lost control of the narrative. She had offered a prize, and he had refused. She had set a trap, and he had walked out of it unscathed. And now everyone there had seen that she needed him more than he needed her. "We'll see," she said, trying to regain her composure. "We'll see if you really know what you're doing." But her voice no longer had the same strength, and everyone understood. Samuel turned back to the locomotive, he picked up the tool, and he began to work, not in a hurry, not angrily, but with that calm that only comes from someone who knows exactly what they are doing. And the entire station held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The first sound was that of metal against metal, dry, precise. Samuel opened the steam chamber with a key that seemed to have been made specifically for that purpose. The crowd approached a step, curious, but he didn't even notice, because at that moment the world had shrunk. There was no more station, no more Eleanor, no more humiliation. There was only the problem, a stuck valve that prevented the steam from circulating correctly, causing the locomotive to suddenly shut down. He stuck his hand inside. The heat still radiated from the metal, burning his skin, but he was used to it. Those hands, marked by scars, knew well the price of working with machines that breathed fire. His fingers groped until they found the part. Stuck indeed. Calcification accumulated from months of negligent maintenance. He shook his head, but said nothing. It wasn't time to judge. It was time to fix. In the crowd, a woman squeezed her young son's hand. A merchant approached, trying to see what Samuel was doing. An old man with a cane murmured something that sounded like a prayer, because everyone there, each in their own way, was rooting for him, not openly, not with words, but with that silent hope of those who had seen powerful people trample on humble people so many times that they no longer believed things could be different. And now, seeing that man work with such precision, such calm, such competence, a spark of hope began to shine. Samuel picked up a smaller, almost delicate tool. He inserted it into the narrow space between the valve and the chamber. He turned it slowly. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but his hand didn't tremble. It couldn't tremble. One wrong move and the valve would break completely, and then the train wouldn't move for days. He took a deep breath and turned it again. A click. Soft, almost imperceptible, but he heard it, and he knew he was on the right track. Eleanor watched everything with her arms crossed, but her posture had changed. Before it was pure arrogance, now there was rigidity, tension, because she knew her own mechanics, the men she kept on the job, who received generous salaries and who had sworn that this train needed to be towed to the central workshop. And now, here was a man she despised, without the company uniform, without expensive tools. Fixing what they said was impossible. She felt something rise in her throat. It wasn't admiration. Not yet. It was fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear that everything she had built was based on bought loyalties and not on real competence. Fear that by humiliating that man, she had revealed not his weakness, but her own ignorance. Samuel removed the valve. It was black with dirt, warped by excessive heat. He cleaned it with a cloth, examined it for a few seconds, and then did something no one expected. He took a small hammer from the toolbox and with precise and controlled blows began to reshape the part. It wasn't ideal. Ideally, he would have a new part, but he didn't have a new part. He only had skill. And sometimes skill was worth more than the best equipment. The beats echoed through the station, rhythmic, confident. Each beat was a silent affirmation. I know what I'm doing. Each movement was a lesson in competence that didn't ask permission to exist. And little by little, even the most skeptical in the crowd began to surrender to the evidence that they were witnessing something rare, true mastery. Eleanor took a step forward, then another. Now she wanted to see up close too. She needed to see, because if he really succeeded, God, if he succeeded, what would that say about her, about the choices she made, about the people she judged without knowing them? Samuel replaced the valve. He tested the fit. Perfect. He closed the chamber, tightened the screws with just the right amount of force, neither too much nor too little. Then he stood up, wiped his hands on the cloth, and looked at the locomotive as one looks at an old friend. He walked to the cab. He climbed in. He checked the gauges. He adjusted a lever, and then, with the confidence of someone who knows that the impossible is just a matter of time and technique, he pulled the main valve. For a second, nothing happened. The silence was so thick that even people's breathing seemed too loud. Eleanor held her breath. The crowd froze, and then it came. The sound. That low, rising whistle that announced the steam was circulating again. The metal groaned, heating up once more. The gears began to move, slowly at first, then with more force. And when the whistle cut through the sky, loud, clear, victorious, the entire station erupted in relieved sighs, restrained smiles, and looks that said more than any words could express. He had done it. Samuel had fixed the impossible. And for a second, even those who hated him, even those who doubted him, even those who rooted against him, had to admit the undeniable truth. That man was greater than any humiliation they had tried to inflict on him. Samuel descended from the cabin slowly. Each step weighed heavily, not from physical exhaustion, but from what he knew was to come. His boots touched the wooden platform with a dull thud, and the silence that formed around him was unlike any other that afternoon. It was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of earned respect, of the impossible accomplished, of the truth that didn't need to be spoken because it was there, evident, steaming in the form of vapor rising from the revived locomotive. Eleanor watched him. Her face had lost that mask of ironic superiority. Now there was only confusion, as if she had prepared a speech for when he failed, but hadn't foreseen this turn of events. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and did what she always did when she lost control, pretended she still had it. "Well," she said, her voice trying to sound firm but coming out slightly shaky, "it seems you really know what you're doing." She forced a smile. "A promise is a promise. I said I'd marry you if you fixed the train, and I'm a woman of my word." The crowd froze, because everyone there understood that this wasn't generosity. It was Eleanor trying to turn defeat into victory, making it seem like she was in control of the situation, as if that marriage were a prize she was graciously bestowing, and not a promise made to humiliate. Samuel wiped his hands on the cloth. He folded it carefully. He put it away in the toolbox. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if he were organizing not only the tools, but also his thoughts. Then he looked up and met her eyes. And for the first time that entire afternoon, it was Eleanor who looked away first. "Mrs. Hartwell," he began, and his voice was so low that people had to lean closer to hear, but it was firm, solid as the rails of that train. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but I'll have to decline." The shock was immediate. Eleanor blinked as if she hadn't understood. "What do you mean, refuse?" "I said I would fix the train, and I did, but I never asked for marriage in return. You offered that on your own initiative, and I don't accept." The word no fell like a stone into a still lake. The ripples spread throughout the station because nobody, absolutely nobody in that region said no to Eleanor Hartwell, especially not in such a calm, respectful yet definitive way. "Are you refusing to marry me?" Her voice rose an octave, mixing disbelief with something bordering on personal offense. "I am, ma'am." Samuel closed the toolbox. "Because marriage isn't a prize. It's not a trophy you win after proving your worth, and it certainly doesn't come from a bet made to humiliate someone." The silence was different now. It was the silence of someone who had just witnessed a profound transformation. Power had changed hands without anyone needing to raise their voice. Samuel wasn't attacking. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was simply telling the truth. And the truth, when spoken firmly and without anger, has a weight that no humiliation can carry. Eleanor felt her face burn, but this time it wasn't anger. It was shame, real deep shame, the kind that can't be disguised with a cold smile or a sharp comment, because she had offered herself as a prize, expecting him to bow in gratitude, and he had refused. Not out of spite, not out of wounded pride, but out of something far more devastating: dignity. "I fixed your train because it was the right thing to do," Samuel continued, and now there was a liberation in his voice, as if each word lifted a weight from his shoulders. "Because there are people in this city who depend on this train, people who don't deserve to suffer because of pride. But I didn't fix it to win you over, because dignity can't be bought, Mrs. Hartwell, and true love isn't born of contempt. It's born of respect, of genuine admiration, of seeing the other as an equal, not as someone who needs to prove they deserve to exist." Each sentence was a lesson, not preached, not shouted, just lived. And Eleanor, for the first time in years, saw herself on the other side of the mirror. She saw how her words sounded, how her actions weighed, how she had used power to hide emptiness, and in the process had become exactly the kind of person she herself wouldn't respect if she knew her from afar. The entire station was watching, but now they weren't watching Samuel to see if he would fail. They were watching Eleanor to see how she would react. The tables had turned completely. She, who had always judged, was now being judged, and the heavy silence that had once fallen on his shoulders now crushed hers. An old man in the crowd tipped his hat and gave Samuel a small, respectful nod. A woman with a child in her arms let out a discreet smile. A merchant looked at Eleanor with something she had never seen before in the eyes of anyone in that town. Disappointment, not fear, not submission. Disappointment. Samuel picked up the toolbox. "The train is fixed, ma'am. You can leave whenever you like." He gave a slight bow, not of submission, but of politeness, and turned to leave. And it was at that moment, watching his back turn away, that Eleanor Hartwell understood something that would change everything. She had just lost much more than a marriage she never truly wanted. She had lost the illusion that power and respect were the same thing. That night, Eleanor Hartwell couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch of the empty mansion, gazing at the distant station, where the smoke from the departing train was still visible against the dark sky. Samuel's words echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "Dignity can't be bought. True love isn't born of contempt." And for the first time in years, she cried, not from anger, not from frustration, but from genuine regret. Because the truth, that truth that hurts when we finally face it, was that she had become exactly the kind of person she despised when she was young. She had used power as a shield, cruelty as protection, and in the process had forgotten that respect isn't imposed, it's earned, and she had earned nothing but fear disguised as obedience. The next morning, Eleanor did something no one expected. She dressed simply, without her usual jewelry, without the pompous carriage, and she walked to the small workshop where Samuel worked. The door was ajar. He was inside, organizing tools, when he heard footsteps. He turned and saw her standing in the doorway, and for the first time, she seemed human, vulnerable, without a mask. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice low, lacking her usual haughtiness. Samuel hesitated but nodded. Eleanor entered slowly, looking around the modest workshop, its grease-stained walls, its carefully hung tools. It was so different from her mansion, but there was something there that the mansion lacked: honesty, real work, purpose. "I came to apologize," she said, the words coming out with difficulty, as if they'd been trapped for years. "Not because you fixed the train, but because I was wrong. In everything. In the way I treated you. In the way I used my power. In the way I confused fear with respect." She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. You showed me yesterday that I'm not the person I thought I was, and that hurts. It hurts a lot, but I needed to hear it." Samuel didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, searching for sincerity, and he found it, because eyes don't lie when the pain is real. "I don't want your forgiveness now," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to do the right thing. I want to somehow repair what I did." She took an envelope from her pocket and placed it on the counter. "This is the deed to a house, small but decent. It's near the station. I thought you might want to live closer to work. And also," she paused, swallowing her remaining pride, "I want you to be the head of maintenance for the railway line, with a fair salary, with respect, with the public recognition you've always deserved." Samuel picked up the envelope. He opened it. He read it. And for a long moment, he said nothing. Because this wasn't just a house. It was recognition. It was a public admission that she was wrong and he was right. It was the transformation of a cruel bet into genuine reparation. "I accept the house," he finally said, "and I accept the job. But not out of pity, Mrs. Hartwell. I accept it because I believe we can change things, and because this city needs people who know how to fix things, not just machines, but also attitudes." Eleanor nodded, and for the first time in years, felt something she didn't know she was still capable of feeling. Hope. Not the hope that everything would go back to the way it was before, but the hope that things could be different, better. In the weeks that followed, the story spread through the region like wildfire. The legend of the mechanic who fixed the impossible and refused the marriage proposal of the richest woman in town. But the real legend, the one people whispered in taverns and on porches, wasn't about fixing the train. It was about something much bigger. It was about a man who taught a lesson without needing to humiliate, about a woman who had the courage to admit she was wrong, about an entire city that learned on that dusty afternoon that dignity is not a luxury for those with money. It is a right for those with character, and that true respect cannot be bought, demanded, or taken away. It is offered, or it is not offered, but it is never faked. Samuel moved into the new house. He took on the role of head of maintenance, and every time a train left the station, its whistle loud and clear, people remembered. They remembered the day a man proved that strength doesn't reside in shouting, and that true victory doesn't require revenge. And Eleanor? Eleanor learned to walk through the city with her head down, not out of permanent shame, but out of hard-won humility. She learned to listen more and speak less, to ask instead of ordering. And little by little, very slowly, she began to rebuild not the image of power she once had, but something far more valuable, a genuine reputation, based on actions, not fear. Because in the end, that afternoon at the station didn't just change 2 lives. It changed an entire city, and the legend that remained wasn't about an impossible fix. It was about a lesson everyone needed to learn. Dignity is not negotiable, respect cannot be bought, and true love never, ever is born from contempt. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me on this journey. Stories like this aren't just about the past. They're about what we carry in our hearts, the choices we make when no one is watching, and the courage to be who we truly are, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. If these stories resonate with you, if they touch on something that words alone can't explain, subscribe to the channel, because every week I bring you narratives like this, stories that make us feel, reflect, and sometimes see our own lives with different eyes. And I want you here in this community, in this conversation that we build together. Leave a comment below saying, "I'm with you until the end." I read them all, seriously. And each of those comments shows me that I'm not alone, that these stories touch hearts. If this story resonated with you in any way, click the like button. It's not about numbers, it's about connection. It's about saying, "I felt that too." And there's a video over here that continues this conversation about dignity, about difficult choices, about people who became legends not for what they achieved, but for what they refused. Click and join me. The story doesn't end here. Until next time. And remember, dignity is not negotiable.